I'm very, very disappointed about that reaction.
You don't exactly have them shaking in their boots.
I see where you're trying to get me.
That doesn't sound like unity.
You cannot cut off the dialogue with Russia, but you need to be very clear, and that's what we are.
For years, Berlin's foreign policy line has been dialogue first. Keep talking no matter what. But as Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny recovers in a German hospital after an apparent poisoning in Siberia, Berlin is under increasing pressure to respond with unprecedented strength by canceling or pausing the nearly completed Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline with Russia. My guest this week is Germany's Deputy Foreign Minister Niels Annen. Is it time for a tougher stance against authoritarians in Russia and beyond, even if there's a financial cost? German Minister of State Niels Annen, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Happy to have you.
Tests confirm that Alexei Navalny was poisoned with the military-grade chemical weapon Novichok. The German chancellor, she has demanded answers from Russia. She says the following: there are very difficult questions that only the Russian government can answer and must answer. The Russian response has been defiant. Will there be meaningful sanctions?
Well, I still hope that we can prevent this, but this is entirely the Russian government's decision. And I have to say, and I want to be very clear, I'm very, very disappointed about that reaction. Because instead of making clear what happened and to cooperate in an investigation, we are seeing the old scheme, of misleading information, of counter-accusations. So if that is the spirit of the Russian government, then I'm afraid we are going to see this, but we are still in a negotiation.
So you say it's in the Russian government's hands. In fact, you've called for an investigation in Russia, but the foreign minister says there are several indications Russia was behind the attack. You're asking Russia to investigate. What do you expect?
Well, look, there is the procedure here. And you mentioned that indeed it looks like, and we are certain that it has been a poison from the Novichok group. And actually, right now, it's not only a German investigation. We gave the probe also to laboratories in Sweden and France, and we also gave it to the OPCW. So it is quite obvious that this is a breach of international law. So I think we are talking not only about a tragedy involving Mr. Navalny. This has an international dimension. So Russia is in a position and has the ability to clarify what happened. But we also, in our intention to defend the international procedures, I think we need to have that process here, and the process is not over.
But in that process, Mr. Annen, they're not taking you seriously, are they? I mean, let's just look at some of the rhetoric coming from the foreign minister.
We think we have an international reaction. This is not reduced to Germany. There's a clear statement from the European Union. The world takes notice. So I don't think they don't take us serious. I just think that they're falling back into what we know is the typical Russian reaction.
Here are their words. Foreign Minister Lavrov accused Western officials of, quote, putting themselves above the law with unsubstantiated accusations against Moscow over the poisoning of Navalny. We also have a statement from the foreign ministry saying Berlin is bluffing, serving a dirty political agenda. You don't exactly have them shaking in their boots.
Look, but this is just confirming what I tried to tell you, that we are very disappointed to see the old way of reacting to accusations instead of really engaging. And I am sure it is the Russian credibility that will be infringed by this. So we are united in the European Union. We feel very encouraged by the international reaction. And we are not only talking about this case, and it's not the only case of poisoning of an opposition leader. We are talking about a serious step to undermining what has been a more or less successful international convention on chemical weapons. So I think we are not at the end here. And
Except you think Russia might be violating it.
And the Russian side needs to know that clear sanctions are on the table.
Let's talk about, you mentioned an old way of doing things from the Russians. Let's talk about the way that you have been doing things. I asked you about meaningful sanctions because we know that sanctions are already in place, of course, since 2014, since the Russian invasion of Crimea. But since then, we have seen further aggression from Russia. We've seen the hacking attacks on the German parliament in 2015. We've seen the assassination of a Chechen rebel in broad daylight in central Berlin last year. Following that murder, your foreign ministry, you reportedly submitted 17 requests for assistance in solving that murder and received not a single response. Is just sanctions really going to pressure Russia in the way that you need to?
Well, look, I'm very happy indeed that you mentioned those incidents. I'm sitting here as the Minister of State, but I'm also a member of the German parliament. So what happened there was the hacking attack is a serious violation of our way to deal among countries that should have a friendly relationship. And many other incidents, also the targeted use, of hybrid measures, of fake news, the troll factories that we are seeing. That is all part of the reality. But it's also part of the reality that we don't have a remote control to influence Russian policies. Decisions are taken in Moscow, not in Berlin. But what is important here, and I think we are making progress, that the European Union speaks with one voice, that the Russian side knows that there's a price to pay, but that we also need to be realistic. We need Russia to solve great many of issues concerning our own neighborhood, our stability. So I think our approach to do both, to be very clear, but also engage Russia, I cannot really see an alternative to that.
Let's talk about the voice, though, that you're speaking with. Because you have the nearly completed Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is set to bring more Russian gas to Germany. And I'd like to ask you, do you think that Putin really takes your threat of meaningful sanctions, meaningful consequences seriously when you have such a profitable economic project right on his doorstep?
Well, look, that only shows how complex our relationship is. I want to be also a little provocative in my answer here, because I'm not so sure if stopping that project Nord Stream 2, which, by the way, is not an initiative of the German government. It is, by definition...
It's supported by the German government.
It is, by definition, a private enterprise.
It's supported by the German government.
Let's put that aside. But, would we do something that really would make Russia pay a price? Or would we also somehow do something that goes against our own long-term interests? So that's why I'm not so convinced. I understand this is and has always been a controversial issue, but it's maybe too easy just to reduce our political toolbox on the question whether or not we should continue Nord Stream 2. I am, with all respect, not convinced that this is the only answer that we should give.
So you've turned to your partners now, your partners including in the EU, including also the United States, and you've asked them, you want to put forward a joint response. But they've always had problems with this project, haven't they? Many among them have had problems with this project. Partners have expressed security concerns that Nord Stream 2 would allow Putin to cut off gas supply to former Soviet bloc countries without affecting flows to the West, cut off Ukraine potentially, where 40% of the natural gas imported by the EU from Russia flows through Nord Stream 1. Do you neglect your own partners' concerns?
Look, there are two things I want to tell you. One thing is that it would maybe surprise you and our viewers that the European Union is much more united on this than you maybe think. We had a diplomatic...
Not the Polish Prime Minister.
Yeah, well...
He says this reaction should lead, first of all, to the stoppage of work of Nord Stream 2, which strengthens Russian power. Not 16 MEPs back in 2018 who wrote to you and pleaded, choose the European way, not the Germany way first.
But you need to let me complete...
That doesn't sound like unity.
You need to let me complete that sentence, because we had 24 European member states supporting a political démarche in Washington, raising concerns about the American reaction. which is threatening with extraterritorial sanction our sovereign decision about our energy supply. Just for a second, think about the European Union would put in place a law sanctioning American companies. Just let me pick one example. For example, the astonishing fact that nobody speaks about the Americans right now buying oil from Russia, almost in the volume that we are buying gas from Russia. So, we need to look at the facts here. And the second part is German government, at the top, the Chancellor and the Foreign Minister, have been engaged and are engaged to safeguard Ukraine's core interest. The deal that we signed, the European Union brokered, but de facto was brokered by our government between Ukraine on the one hand and the Russian Federation on the other hand, made sure that key concerns of our partners within the European Union and in Kiev have been implemented. So, as I said, it's too simple just to say closing Nord Stream 2 will solve the problem.
I'd like to ask you if anyone really believes, though, that you're going to take a hard line on Russia, though ultimately when push comes to shove, even when it does come to Ukraine. Because, for example, you and the Foreign Minister, Heiko Maas, you're both SPD politicians.
Sure, and probably
in the
so.
SPD, there are many who are strongly opposed to halting the construction of this pipeline. For example, we have the Prime Minister of the German state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern who says the following: the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia to Germany should not be used to punish Moscow over the poisoning of a Kremlin critic, Alexei Navalny. The Süddeutsche Zeitung has called the SPD the Nord Stream party. They have a point, don't they?
No.
They say that you're motivated by a traditional empathy with Russia.
No, they don't have a point. I like to remind you, we are used as social democrats and we're proud serving here in our positions. We are somehow getting used to this kind of accusation, but it doesn't make them correct. Energy policy, of course, is highly political. We need to make sure that there's a clear mix between renewables. We need a breaching technology. Gas is much more efficient and less harm to the environment.
But we have to address an elephant in the room.
Sure.
Because we were talking about the SPD, we were talking about your party and its relationship with Russia. The elephant in the room, of course, when we talk about Nord Stream, is Gerhard Schröder, former chancellor, former SPD head, chairman of the project. The Wall Street Journal calls Schröder Putin's most important oligarch.
Yeah, the Wall Street
Do you
Journal
feel comfortable with that? Do you feel comfortable with that? Putin's most important oligarch.
The Wall Street Journal has traditionally been maybe not the most sympathetic to the Social Democrats, but I tell you something, I have been maybe the most vocal critic of Gerhard Schröder's policy. And, he is somebody who needs to accept that there's public criticism for private decision he takes. But he is a private citizen. He is not sitting in any body of the SPD. So the SPD cannot be blamed for what Gerhard Schröder is doing.
Is it really realistic, though, that he's a private citizen? And
Absolutely.
It is. Okay, so he's a private citizen.
Sure.
So we were talking about meaningful sanctions.
Yeah.
Part of the meaningful sanctions was that there would be targeted sanctions against individuals, correct?
Yes, correct.
So, therefore, if he's just a private person working for Putin, should he be among the individuals who might be targeted in a sanctions regime as a result of the poisoning of Alexei Navalny?
I see where you're trying to get me, but I'm not going to defend a private decision by a former chancellor who, in other parts, I think, has been very successful and important for Germany. He always knew
But if you want to exert
to be
maximum pressure on Russia, maximum pressure.
But this is what he's doing with Nord Stream is he's filling a seat for European companies. So, and there's always that narrative that this is only a German project. There are actually companies from other European partners also involved. So I really think we're now spending, and it's your questions, I'm trying to answer, that's okay with me, but we're spending more time talking about Nord Stream 2 right now than we're spending time on talking about our difficult relationship with Russia. And I also want to again remind
It's part
our
of the
viewers
relationship with
that,
Russia.
Of course, and I said
You're
it's a complex
increasing the economic
relationship.
ties with Russia.
Yeah, it is a complex relationship. You know, our American friends, they have an ocean between them and Russia. We don't. We have a joint and shared history. Russia is not going to go away. And the decision about where Russia is heading may be influenced by us, but it's a Russian decision. So we are talking about peace in Libya. You need to talk with Russia. We're talking about peace in Syria. Like it or not, you need to talk with Russia. And there are many other aspects. So we are trying
So
to...
dialogue no matter what. Dialogue no matter what, the cost no matter what Russia does.
No. This is very important to me because it's really what I believe in, is that we are in a world where apparently many of the established rules are not binding countries like Russia, and unfortunately even sometimes countries that we are more close to. So Germany is in a central position geographically in Europe. It's the most important economy. We are not, projecting military power. So we need to rely on the willingness and ability to apply by those rules. And that's what we are trying. So you cannot cut off the dialogue with Russia, but you need to be very clear, and that's what we are.
Let's talk about another country where you have a lot of dialogue. We have to mention, let's go to China now.
Sure.
Also in the news for its continued infringement of human rights and rule of law, similar to Russia. In a speech before the parliament on September 10th, you said the following: human rights are a central element of our China policy. Mm-hmm. How's that working out for the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong?
Well, we are, and I hope that I'm not going, I'm not intending to criticize any of our European partners, but I really think sometimes we need, as a government, explain more what we are doing. I think Germany is maybe the only relevant country right now that is addressing human rights issues with China on every high-level meeting that we are having. Sometimes we do that publicly, sometimes we don't do that publicly because we're talking about individual cases. We have an established human rights dialogue. And quite frankly, we tried to celebrate a EU-China summit in order to generate more European unity, also on human rights.
But let's talk about the message that you are sending, though. You might have the dialogue, but the message, the real message that you're sending. How can China really believe that you are serious on human rights when in every state visit you show up with a huge business delegation? And I'd just like to go to the last one with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. That was in September of 2019, where amid the crackdown on the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong, she sat along the Chinese premier. And in her visit, it was crowned by overseeing the signing of 13 business deals between German and Chinese executives in the Great Hall of the People in Tiananmen Square. Is it trade over human rights? Because that's what it looks like.
I don't think that it looks like this. I don't see that this is a contradiction. I mean, if the policy would be to completely exclude China from our political landscape and from our political thinking, well, I think we are not going to serve our own interests here. And I am very concerned that this is going to happen if we are listening to some of the very inflammatory rhetoric right now. We need to avoid falling back into the logic of a new Cold War. But you ask about the effectiveness of our policies. And I can tell you that there are many cases, and some are prominent cases, like the widow of the Nobel Prize winner, who came into freedom and could leave the country because of very, very high-level interventions from Germany. And there are
but that's not always the case, is it? And
I'd
like to bring in.
Yeah, I just want to say that there is, and I mean we cannot ignore that. There is a temptation for many leaders around the world not to do that what we are doing as German government, because they believe that if they don't address human rights issues, that are maybe going to benefit economically. And that's not what we are doing. And I'm very proud of this.
Philosophically speaking, when we look at your overall diplomatic strategy, we have, for example, your economy minister saying just back in July, in a conversation with Politico, he said, I still believe in transformation through trade when it comes to China. Your own German Industry Association has come out and said, they published a paper last year calling for a tougher approach to China. Their message was the West strategy for opening China has failed.
Yeah.
This is a wake-up call, they have said. In the case of China, isn't it both outdated and naive to think you're going to have transformation through trade? It's not happening.
Can I make one comment? Because you were really asking me, insisting on the question of me and my boss, Heiko Maas, being members of the Social Democratic Party. So now you're trying to put me into responsibility for something.
Well, you're part of the government. You're part of the government with your Christian Democratic partners.
And I can tell you that I think we had maybe a decade where we were Social Democrats and Christian Democrats, and liberals and Greens or whatever, maybe too optimistic about the impact of our economic engagements on democracy and human rights. I think this is very obvious. China changed. The guiding policies of Deng Xiaoping, so to bide your time, never takes the lead, that is over with President Xi. And that's why we're in the midst, and that's why I welcome your question. We are in the midst of a debate how to readjust our China policy. And I think we need to defend our interest stronger, but we shouldn't cut off our ties with China.
You need allies to deal with China
Absolutely.
and Russia. You absolutely do. Let's look at the state of your alliances right now. The U.S. is pulling 12,000 troops out of Germany. It's reportedly because you didn't meet your defense spending goals, the NATO 2% goal of GDP for defense spending. What does it say about the state of your diplomacy that this announcement reportedly, first of all, caught you by surprise? Shouldn't you have seen it coming from the U.S.? They said they would.
Well,
there would be consequences.
Well, look, I mean, we don't believe that reducing troops in Germany is an instrument to harm Germany or to castigate Germany. Those troops, if you look carefully about what they are doing, they are serving the interests of the United States Armed Forces, and they are part of a deterrence where not only Germany is benefiting, but Europe as a whole. So we had some problems to understand the logic behind that decision. But it is a national decision.
What's the problem to understand? You're not spending 2% of GDP. You're not on track to spending 2% of GDP. This is a commitment that you made to your allies at a NATO summit in Wales in 2014, commitment that
if
you don't appear to be intent on fulfilling.
The numbers of the appropriations that we made in terms of defense spending, they are no secret. They are well known in Washington. So if they look at what we are doing, it's clear that we are on track, to quote you, that we are massively increasing our defense spending. But by the way, not because somebody in the United States is demanding that from us, but because we see that the world is changing, that we talked about it. Russia is getting more assertive. We have conflicts in our own neighborhoods. So that's the reason why we are doing this. And so I think we cannot neglect that we have political differences. There's a very, I'm in the foreign ministry here, so there's a unique style of the American president, but the basis of our relationship is stronger than the relationship between us and Mr.
Ultimately,
Trump.
when we look at the big picture, when we look at the broad picture, when we look at the actions, not just the talk, but the actions that your government and your country is taking, you're adhering to deals in Russia. The Nord Stream 2 project, which is profitable.
You want us to restart the discussion again?
Well,
I don't agree on that.
We discussed it. Yeah. Also, you have a very robust trade relationship with China that is increasing. Countries where they're open human rights offenders. But you're not fulfilling your commitments to allies like NATO, for example, when it comes to increasing defense spending. Is this really the way forward for German diplomacy? Is this really what takes you into the next decades and beyond?
Look, we are NATO. So we are doing this because of our own interest. It's German fighter planes right now that are defending the Baltic skies. It's German soldiers who are part of the very high readiness joint task force. It's a German initiative that we took up, and we are going to build a new NATO headquarters. So nobody needs to teach us about how important NATO is. And I tell you something. Sometimes our friends and allies, I don't want to name countries here, but sometimes friends and allies, they simply assume that the German would react in the way we do. How are we doing this? Rational, we're not going to be provoked. We're not cutting our dialogue and the networks that we have been building. This is important for Europe. So I'm happy to take some blame. There's sometimes disappointment. People sometimes have that strange idea that it's weakness not to respond in kind. But we are the force that is keeping all this together.
German Minister of State Niels Annen, thank you for joining us on Conflict Zone.
Thank you so much.